Now, if that person doesn't want anybody in the room, lights are dim, everybody's out, they're getting my full attention. I'm not on my phone. I'm not Skyping. I'm not Instagramming, texting. My attention is on the person singing 20 feet from me. And I believe that they're the most important person in my life at that particular time.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey rock stars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, the podcast bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Carl Nappa, with over 30 gold, platinum, and multi-platinum records as an engineer, mixer, or producer. He has worked with a long list of high-profile artists in rock, hip-hop, R&B, and pop. In his 20-plus year career, Carl is credited as engineer or producer for more than 50 million records sold. He has been a staff engineer at the Hit Factory in New York City, owned and operated Hell's Kitchen Recording and Social Club in New York City for 4 years, is a voting member of NARAS, and now also teaches in St. Louis at the Extreme Institute by Nelly. Carl's extensive discography includes many names that you will recognize, like Nelly, Chris Brown, R. Kelly, NSYNC, Limp Bizkit, Ice Cube, NRBQ, Blondie, Moody Blues, John Mellencamp, Mariah Carey, Prince, Wyclef Jean, Run DMC, I like that one. Pet Shop Boys, like that one too. Alan Parsons, David Bowie, Michael Jackson, Missy Elliott, Madonna, and the Manhattan Transfer, and the list goes on and on. Sorry that was so long, man. I pared it down to just, I deleted ones that I wanted to say in your list too. Please welcome Carl Nappa to Recording Studio Rockstars. Carl, my friend, are you ready to rock?
I am ready to rock. Thank you.
I was thinking about an alternative way to ask you about, are you ready? And I was trying to think of what's the term for hip hop? It's like, are you ready to bring that beat back? Are you ready to drop the needle? What would we say instead of rock?
In hip hop, I guess you would say, I have no idea. Right, you really got me on that one. You finally stumped me.
All right, man. We're just getting started.
All
right, cool, man. Well, so here's a twist on this first question. When you were starting out in recording, we want to get more background on you, but sure. What did it smell like to you?
Tape,
nice.
Yeah, we used 456 back then. And I remember distinctly because where I sat in the control room when I first started working in Boston, I sat next to a JH24. And I distinctly remember the smell of the analog tape. And it's funny that you mentioned that because no one's ever really made me think back to then, and all of those, I guess that sense memory of that studio was a studio called Cortland Recording in Hanson, Massachusetts, about 20 to 30 minutes south of Boston. Nice, and I worked for an engineer named Bob St. John, and he had a production company called PDQ Slam Productions with a producer named Anthony Resta. And I used to just hang out. Like in the beginning, I was invited down because I was teaching guitar at the same music store as Anthony. He was teaching drums. And Bob just needed some help, someone to set up some microphones and things like that, and a runner. And I would constantly bother those guys to see if I could come to the studio. And I remember the smell of the tape machine, of the actual tape,
I love it when you rewind the tape. What's remarkable to me is that I still smell the tape, even though my tape reels are probably 10 years old. If I use them for something, you can just smell it when it's rewinding. Yeah. It's just like the breeze of oxide. Yeah. People used to always say this joke. I don't know if they said this when you were in the studio too, but people always say I love the smell of oxide in the morning. The quote from Apocalypse Now. Well, cool, man. So what else? What were some other smells that bring back memories of places you were in terms of studios you were starting out in? Do you remember the smell of cleaning the bathroom as you started in the studio?
Man, I mean, luckily the position I'm in right now with running the school down here for Nelly, I get to talk to a lot of students, obviously, when they start. Right now I'm teaching our capstone class, their final project, and I get to talk to them on the way out. And I tell them the same thing. And it's not so much a smell, but it's just a memory of of just wanting to be in that studio and wanting so bad to do whatever I had to do. You want me to clean? No problem. You want me to go rake the leaves outside? No problem. Do you want me to set up the microphones? No problem. You know, I tell students a lot of times on my way into work, I'd swing by the local supermarket and, you know, you could take a bag to the bakery and you fill it with donuts and Danish. And I'd look for the cutest and the youngest little cashier. And I'd walk up to her and she'd be like, what do you got? And I'm like, 2 donuts? Oh, 50 cents. Thank you. You know, and meanwhile, I have a bag that's everything's falling out of, but I'd bring it to the studio and, you know, make a fresh pot of coffee before, you know, producers got there, engineers and talent and artists or whatever you want to call them. And there'd be fresh coffee and donuts. And these guys would look at me like, wait, we're not paying you and you're showing up with all this stuff? Yeah, I want you to remember me. Customer service. You know, I'm a firm believer, and the years at the Hit Factory proved it, is that, you know, people want to go into the studio and just feel like, you know, king and queen. Even if they're like a local band or a brand new rapper or, you know, just part of a cast. We used to do a lot of cast albums. You know, who doesn't want to be treated right? And, you know, I learned early on that, you know, that's the service we provide. No matter what I've done or you know, all those accomplishments that you so nicely said in the beginning, I'm not too big to go grab someone a coffee or water or, you know, do something like that. I think that's part of what we do and what we're bringing in. And at the end of the day, I want to be invited to the next party. So, you know, I want to make sure that I'm doing right by my clients. Well,
just on the off chance that somebody walks in and asks you to grab them a coffee while we're doing this interview, will you do me a favor and tell them to go get themselves a coffee for the next hour?
I've locked the door, so we're good.
So, yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I remember when I started out, you know, I was at Alex the Great, and as an assistant or an intern, whatever the session was, I was like, yeah, you guys need the weeds eated, you know, out in front of the studio? No problem. And I took a weed eater out there and I'm tearing down like, you know, 4-foot high grass and stuff that's all over the place. And I remember distinctly sort of destroying my brand new Doc Marten boots that I was wearing while I was out there. But I was like, oh, well, you know, it's worth it.
Yeah, to prove that you were, you know, you wanted them to realize you're not afraid to work.
Yeah. And, you know, also funny enough, the internship that I had over at Woodland Studios, I remember there was this token request one day for me to go wash the bathrooms. And it was like, I never got asked to clean the bathrooms again. I think they had a bathroom cleaner. It was just like this rite of passage that I was handed all the bathroom cleaning, go clean the bathrooms, you know.
Yeah. I
actually clean a lot more bathrooms now that I own the studio than I ever did as an intern. But, you know, hey, it's all good.
Right, it's your studio.
Yeah. So, all right, well, cool. So tell us, you know, what would you like to tell us about? You want to tell us about your time at the Hit Factory? That sounds like that was pretty cool. I've had a couple of other guests who were there probably, you know, 10, 15 years before you were.
Yeah. So like I said, I started in Boston. The engineer that I did most of my work for, this guy, Bob St. John, his main client was a band called Extreme. And More Than Words and all those records right after that, Extreme 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And I would travel with them. And we traveled all over the country. We even went to London to record Strings at Abbey Road. And I was a traveling assistant. And we did this long record in Miami at Criteria. And when we finished it, Nuno wanted to go to New York City to record his solo record. So we went to a place called Clinton Recordings in Hell's Kitchen. And this was way before Giuliani. This was 1990 something. And, you know, where Clinton was a little bit rough, you know. I was dating a woman from New Jersey at the time, and she would come visit me and not get out of her car. And she'd be like, you got to run out. Like, I'm not getting out in this neighborhood. And anyway, so we're there for about a week. And we went out one night, me, Nuno, and some other guys. We went to we went to the Roxy or wherever we went. And I turned to him, we're at a light right in front of the Beacon Theater. And I go, hey, man, I think I'm going to stay in New York City. And he looked at me, he goes, yeah, that's cool. You know, you have about a week before we start up in Boston after we leave New York. I said, no, I'm going to stay. He looked at me kind of funny thinking, well, how are you going to go to work? I mean, it's a 4-hour commute every day. I said, no, I'm quitting. I'm not going to work for Bob anymore. Like, I'm going to move on. I've been assistant long enough. And he was visibly upset. I think he thought we're all going to grow old together in our roles, and because it was a great team, don't get me wrong. But you know, how can you know, as an assistant, you don't want to assist forever. I mean, I know guys that did it a lot longer than I did, but it just, I wanted to get into the hot seat.
I'm from Boston too. I actually grew up in Concord, and I saw that you were at UMass Lowell before, doing all this stuff, and it's so it feels like home. Feels like home, man.
Yeah, your accent is as thick as mine, though.
And then let's see, what was the other analogy or the other connection I was going to make? You talked about going down to Criteria Studios. Yep. So here at my place, I have a custom-built MCI that used to be at Criteria C all through the 70s.
Really?
So I have the same, the rock stars, they've already heard this many times, but I have the same board that did Hotel California down there and the Bee Gees records and stuff. So
that's a beautiful studio too. Studio C, right? Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was in Studio C. So you were moving down to New York. Tell us, pick it up from there. Tell us about going to New York.
And the reason I tell the story this way is that I always tell people that doors are always open for us. As a professional or as what we do, it's up to us to go through that door and keep it open. And Nuno's the one that really opened the door for me at the Hit Factory. He called Troy the Son and set up a meeting with me to meet with him. So I get my crappy little resume that I had that I thought was the biggest thing in the world. And I, show up for this interview. And he told me very specifically, he goes, you have a meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the Hit Factory. Our session starts at 11. Don't be late. And he was very serious. He was really busting my chops. Uh-huh. But I went there and, we talked to Troy for about a half an hour or so, not even. And, there's legendary stories because we traveled a lot and I talked to a lot of people and I knew I wanted to go to New York. So as I'd pick people's brains, I'd say, well, what studios did you work when you were in there? Oh, I worked at the Hit Factory, but I got fired. Oh, I worked at the Hit Factory, but I got fired. And that's what the common denominator was with most people. And with me, and everybody says, don't go there. And I hate to say it, but when you tell me not to do something,
you're going to do it.
I'm going to do it every single time.
Nice.
And that's what I wanted to do. I really wanted to work there. I wanted to see if I'd get fired. And Troy looks at me at one point in the interview and he goes, so what do you want from me? You have a gig. And I said, well, I want to come work for you. I want to live in New York City. He's like, you're hired. Can you start tomorrow? I'm like, well, I'm in this record till the end of the month. We looked at a calendar. We finished on a Friday. On a Monday, I was my first day at work.
Nice, man.
And that was just a little bit after they had opened up 421. So they had two studios. They had one between 9th and 10th and a newer building between 10th and 11th. So maybe it was a year or so after they opened up the newer building, or a couple of years. So it wasn't that long that had been opened.
And so what's the year now?
1990, I don't remember, 4, 5, 6, somewhere around there.
Mid-90s, right. Okay,
mid to early 90s. We had 10 recording studios. We had every console at one point. We had VRs, we had SSLGs, we had a Sony Oxford, we had an old 8068, we had an 8014 that used to belong to Bruce Swedin. Maybe it was an 8028.
Nice.
With GML automation. I remember that console. And, just so as an assistant, you had to know everything. And I just dove right in, because growing up with Bob and Nuno, those guys loved the Neve console. So I literally went, head deep into, all these different boards. And I think I assisted for maybe 6 months. And that's when they started throwing me engineering work. And then after that, it went pretty quick. My change from assisting to engineer was very fast. Even though we weren't staff engineers, we were staff engineers.
That's cool, man. Tell us, you listed all these consoles, and a lot of the rock stars aren't necessarily going to know what they are. Some of them may. A lot of people might know them only because of plug-in emulations. Would you be able to list off the top of your head, if you were bringing a certain band, not necessarily the band by name, but by style, what sorts of music would go in and want to work on those different consoles when you were doing sessions?
Any of the old Neves, the 8068, the 8078, anything with an 80, the 80 series, they call them. They have their own sound. It's a very distinct sound. It's a thicker sound, a lot of mid-range point on it. Great for doing rock and roll, country. Anything with a lot of live instruments.
Because it almost soaks up the sound, right? All the transients coming through a mic just kind of get smoothed out in a nice way.
And I don't want to use horrible adjectives, but when I'm thinking about how audio goes through some of those consoles, there's some hocus pocus going on where maybe the low end might not be as punchy and as defined, but it's just so smooth, Where if you're doing something on hip hop, where you're looking for this really big, tight bottom, that might be the wrong console for you. Also, because of the limitations of those desks, that Bruce Sweeney console we had 4 sends, but only one knob that you'd have to switch between the sends. So if you were mixing on that desk, you really had to pre-think what effect was going to be on a send. You had to use some buses. It had to be very well thought out.
Yeah.
Where, you get like a SSL J series console, or a K, which was the newest of the last of the big analog ones. I think you had 8 mono sends. So you could have
crazy.
Tons and tons of effects and stuff like that. But a lot of times back then, we just got booked in rooms that were open. So someone would call and they needed a room, and that night you'd be working on an SSL, or the next night you'd be working on one of those old Neves or a Neve VR. A lot of people were afraid of the digital console, that Sony Oxford that we had. And I just loved it because all of a sudden I could take a snapshot of my mix and I can come back in tomorrow. And it was way before Pro Tools,
Mm-hmm.
Well, I shouldn't say way before. It was around the same time, but nobody was mixing in Pro Tools at that point. We're just still using it as a recorder.
Yeah.
And I could take a snapshot and my mix is back. I did this record, a live record called Live at 125th Street. It was like a Def Jam Survival of the Illest. That's what it was called. And I literally mixed the whole thing before I printed it. It was, 4, 5, 6 major rap artists. And we just took scenes and all the automation was saved. It was the first time I had mixed that way where I didn't have to commit until the very end. And it was a great way to work, especially with a live show. Now in Pro Tools, we take it for granted that when I save my session and close it, it's going to come exactly where it was when I finished.
Yeah, that's so true. One of the things that I remember doing with analog tape is as you pulled up, you came back to a song to continue doing overdubs or work on it. This would be the 6th time, 7th time you'd mix the song since you started the record, because every time you pull up the track, you sort of begin to remember what you were doing last time you mixed it and the faders. And in some ways, I almost miss that where you get to mix a song a number of times before it's time to mix the song. And in other ways, it's so nice to just have, the session just pull up and be exactly where you left it.
Sure. And you try different things, or you might do a different level or a pan and be like, wow, I really like that. I'm going to, remember that one.
Yeah.
And I also think what happened back then, and I was talking to somebody about it recently, is that our mixing skills got better without us thinking about it because we're constantly mixing.
Yeah.
We're constantly throwing faders up and making really split decisions before a client came in the door or was sitting next to you waiting for it to sound great.
Yeah. I mean, you're doing things quickly.
Yep.
Yeah, it was definitely. And you would get in the habit, hopefully you'd get in the habit of printing rough mixes all along the way. And
Sure.
even that art is a little bit lost in the world of Pro Tools or, working in a DAW, because we don't always print a rough mix along the way. We might, but a lot of times we might just close it down and come back later. When you had all those old rough mixes, I've saved a record in the past where I went and listened to the rough mix and I realized I had a far better mix going than the one I was trying to do when I was mixing. So sometimes it's nice to remember to just capture snapshots all along the way while you're working on a record.
And, that also led to a lot of demoitis back then.
Right. Not always a good thing.
I think nowadays it's 10 times worse. I do a lot of mixing now, and if I don't get a rough mix from a client, there's definitely the first round of revisions is going to be a lot of them because they've been listening to something for maybe 6 months. Where if I'm getting something, faders at 0, no pans, I'm just doing what I want to do instead of what they're used to doing.
Yeah.
So, I think demoitis is very strong right now in the industry. It's not a bad thing. It's just, there's no need to reinvent the wheel every time we open up a session.
Right. Sometimes if somebody's already got, 80% of a song figured out in the way it should sound toward the mix, and you just want to focus on that last 20% when you're mixing it and not have to start from 0 and focus on all 100%.
Sure.
Well, cool, man. Well, so now I like to ask our guests, Carl, to share an inspirational quote on the podcast. Have you got anything that get us kind of psyched up about hitting the studio and making records?
I do. It's kind of goofy, but it's from a poem by Arthur O'Shaughnessy. And it's funny because we have a graduation coming up, and this is actually how I'm going to start the graduation. And it's really just the first 2 lines, and it's a poem that's been around forever. It's been in movies. Nobody really associates it with him. They associate it with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Nice.
But, it's the first, I'm just going to say the first two lines, and it's, we are the music makers and we are the dreamer of dreams. And, at first, when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's cute. And then the more I think about it, being in the trenches, being behind the scenes, not necessarily being an artist, but we are the music makers. We are facilitating someone's dreams,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people come to us to be able to get from point A to point B with their recordings. They might not be the best recorder, but they have some phenomenal songs, and we're facilitating them. And it's our duty to do the best that we can and not screw it up.
Yeah, it's so true. I've thought about that many times where I realized that a lot of what I did or have done in the studio is just help other people realize their dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Their musical dreams. So it's an interesting thing to think about too, because there's a lot of different levels to that. Sometimes people come in and they really clearly know what they're trying to do, and you facilitate that by just letting, helping make it happen. Other times you might be working with a new artist that has, some sort of clear vision, but there's a lot that they don't really know, and they want you to contribute as much as possible. Talk a little bit about that, the difference between being minimal with your engineering and production and being maximal with it, but how in both cases they might be helping realize somebody's musical dream.
Let's just start off by saying that I believe that a song will always tell you what to do. And I know that sounds kind of like hippie-ish, and my head's in the clouds. But I feel as a lot of times producers and sometimes even engineers don't listen to the core of the song. A lot of times our production's wrapped up in trying to make the song what we think it should be, showing off maybe our ego, like, look what I can do. Where if we stopped and listened, the production would really kind of just fall into place. Now, that being said, there are times when you'll have an artist who has so little experience in the studio that, I hate to say it, that sometimes we are educating them as well as recording them.
Yeah.
Showing them the different paths that we can take. And sometimes that takes a little longer because, if I'm giving you 15 examples of what we can do or why we should do it, it's going to take a little longer. Whereas if I'm working with a seasoned artist, like I had the good fortune of working with Prince at a young age. When he came into the studio, and I'll tell you this story, and it kind of relates. There was people in the control room. We were in Studio One at the Hit Factory, which was an orchestral room, so it was enormous. It could fit about 100 people. And the control room literally could fit about 25 or 30 people comfortably.
Wow.
And he's on the couch with this Parker on, with the hood over his head, and technicians are running around setting up we had a 3348 digital tape machine, and all these other things, and his bodyguards were there, and I'm sitting there going, what the fuck is going on? Can I swear in a podcast?
Yeah, you can. I rated explicit on iTunes,
okay.
just so we're safe.
Got you. And all of a sudden, the last guy walks out, the door shuts, and he stands up, throws the jacket on the couch. He goes, okay, this is what we're going to do. I want to take this. I want to fly it here. I want you to take this. I want to have that. I want to double this up. I want to bring a microphone in here. I'm going to do the vocals from here. Then we're going to do these other vocals out there. And it was like, holy smokes, just hold on for the ride. Here's someone who knew exactly what they wanted to do, knew how to do it, but wanted me to do it, was making sure it was done perfectly to his expectations and what he wanted. And so you have complete opposite sides of the spectrum. You have someone who's done a million records and knows exactly what can happen. And then, you have the beginners that, think they might know. So it's a tough one. You don't want your ego to get away of anything. And sometimes it does with us, but
man, on that Prince session, you didn't even have time to let your ego get in the way. God. You probably just had to bust ass and get all that stuff hooked up. And when it goes well, it's so much fun to do that stuff. Yeah. When it doesn't go well, it's not much fun at all.
No, it's like, setting up this session with Skype, it was not fun.
Yes, right. We had Rockstars. Yeah. We had quite a few challenges getting everything to go. Let's talk about that for just a sec, because it's pretty funny. So, when we do an interview over Skype like this, we have to make sure that my microphone is going into Skype, and then my guest, Carl, has to do this. And I'm doing this every day, so I've got a setup that I know exactly what to do. But unless you're doing it every day, you're having to figure it out and get it going. Before we did this, I think I messaged you on Skype 15 minutes before the interview, and then literally 4 minutes before my Comcast internet just gave out and just quit. Just no internet. I'm like, oh man, come on, really? No, there's only so much you can do. You're at the mercy of the internet gods, right? And then of course, Carl, on your end, we had to just sort through like, okay, well, how are we going to connect the mic in? And I'm giving you credit for having one of the best mic sounds we've ever gotten on the podcast. Yeah. So nicely done there.
Thank you.
But the conclusion on my end, Rockstars, is that I used my iPhone in tether mode and hotspot mode to do all the internet for the studio computer. And it actually is working better than my fancy internet for the studio. And what's my takeaway? Sorry, Carl, I'm going to let you have a word in edgewise too.
That's fine. That's right.
What's my takeaway? My takeaway is that I've said this many times. The number one skill set we need to know as engineers is the skill, the power of the workaround, because there's always a problem and you just don't give up.
That's exactly right. And even on my end with the Apollo, because I had it in Pro Tools mode to mix off of it, or mix through it, I should say, we didn't know until we went and looked it up that we had to take that off and go regular mode. So
yeah, I was your assistant, right? I was doing the Googling for you. But I mean, that really is an important thing. And I know we're going on a tangent here, but it's what engineering, it's what making records is all about. It's about not giving up. I mean, I had every reason to just say, Carl, I'm sorry, man, the internet's quit. Looks like we'll have to reschedule. But we sort of persevered and here we are. So let's jump back in, man. What do you say?
I agree 1,000%. And I think the most important thing to remember is that to never give up. There's going to be times when there's a deadline. And if you give up, the records that we make will never get done because there's always going to be a deadline. Yeah. There's always going to be a session that went a little bit over and the next guy's waiting in the other room. There's always going to be a mix that needs one more tweak to make a client happy. And it might be 4 a.m. and you're really tired, but you know that if you launch your Pro Tools rig, and take that snare down a dB, they're going to be more than happy.
You might be your own client.
Yes. That's absolutely right.
You might be, like we so often are, your own worst critic, making yourself go back and do one more mix. Mm-hmm. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but I find when I'm doing stuff, I see a repeated pattern of going back, and then finally I do one tweak and I listen to it. I'm like, okay, that tweak is not better than where I was, and I'm done.
Yes. For me, I like to listen. So as I'm working, I'm always hearing something I need to do, right? We're always making notes and check this and do this and do this. And as those notes kind of dwindle away, I'll start to just stop looking at the screen as much and just start to listen and maybe stick on one particular speaker for a while and get used to the sound of it. As I notice I'm just listening, a lot of times I like having a TV on in the control room, just watching a movie with no sound. And I find myself watching a movie and listening to the song and thinking, wow, that's really good. Then I start to freak out. Like, did I miss something? Is all my plugins working? And then you start to, come back to reality. And I'll listen, instead of bursts listening, I'll listen to the verse and listen to the other verse. I listen to full song. And I listen from beginning to end. And as my notes start to dwindle again, where I'm not making as many notes, that's when I know I'm done.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about notes. I have found that to be one of the most effective skills for me for mixing is when I have a notepad. I've usually got a clipboard with a piece of paper and a pencil right next to me. Mm-hmm. And I just learn to, when I identify problems in the studio, just write it down. Just like write it down. I think one of the first places I learned this was taking a mix out to the car to reference it. You kind of don't have any choice. But if you take paper with you and pencil and write down all these different things, it's so much easier to come back in to do your remix and just address each element. Instead of trying to look at the whole big picture, you can just go in with your microscope goggles on, deal with each element, print it, and then go listen in the car again. Because when you don't write notes, it can start to feel pretty overwhelming. You start chasing every little problem that you run into, and I don't know. It's like you can go down a real rabbit hole that way.
Well, you know what I do too? I don't just write notes of what I don't like. I write notes to future Carl of things that I do like. So let's say I'm listening and the second verse is incredible. The vocal is perfect. It's just fitting with the mix. I'll write to myself, second verse, perfect. Don't change. So that when I'm starting to second guess myself, when I go back and do whatever I want to do to the first verse, and I get to that second verse, I'm like, wait, no. And when I was listening as a listener, that was perfect. Let me go back to that first verse and double check it, go between the two, and make sure that future Carl doesn't screw stuff up.
That's cool, man. Notes to future Carl. Is that the name of your book that you haven't written yet?
It should be.
Maybe make a note to yourself to write it later.
That's a good idea.
All right. So one of the things I also like to ask guests is to share an important failure. We kind of did with our Skype thing. Is there any kind of a good anecdote or story you'd like to share about a nightmare in the studio for us?
I actually have one that occurred this year. So I've been doing these records with a guy named Floyd. He lives in Massachusetts and on the Vineyard. And we've made records with a few bands that he's been in. He was in a band called You Scream, I Scream, or still is. And he's also in a band called Violent May. And he called me up and he said, hey, man, I'm doing this new album. I've mixed it all, but I'm kind of unhappy with the mixes. Can you check them out for me? And he sends me the mixes. And I go, man, these are great. You did a fantastic job. He's like, yeah, I'm not feeling it. I go, well, let me take a stab, So it's just a duo. It's a drummer. He plays drums and his partner sings and plays guitar.
Nice.
And any voting members out there, we are on the ballot this year for Best Rock Album. Just going to throw that little plug in there.
Oh, cool, man. That's me.
But anyways, so he sends me the stuff and I'm in full on, professional mode. I grab the stuff. I know there's a quick turnaround and I just jump into mixing. And I heard the stuff as polished pop. So, I'm cleaning up noises, I'm editing stuff, I'm making sure the vocals and the guitars are blended perfectly because I don't have a lot to work with. I have maybe some songs just have like 1 or 2 guitar tracks and a vocal, full drum kit and guitar and a vocal. So I'm really like taking advantage of, reverbs and tails and things like that. And I've sent him the first 3 mixes. And I don't hear anything back. And, Floyd's really good about getting back quickly. I'm working on the next 3 and I send those one at a time and I'm still not hearing anything back. So finally, like, something's up. I call him up and I go, hey, what's up with the mixes? And you get that little, pause and he's like, well, I've been playing them for people. And all of a sudden I'm starting to get nervous. And he goes, I've been thinking and it's just, it's such a different direction than we all heard it as. And I start fighting for my side. No, man, this is pop music. And he's like, no, this is indie rock. Like you made it too pretty. You made it too good. You made it too pop. And I guess the fail moment is that I didn't listen to the song. I didn't listen to what they were doing. And I assumed that they wanted me to do what I wanted to do.
Right. You assumed that they wanted you to change it.
Yes. And so I told him, I said, don't fire me, give me notes on just 1 or 2 songs, actually 3 songs, and let me see what I can do. He gave me the notes and I literally undid all the crap that I had done and I mixed it the way they wanted to. And he called me up. He goes, dude, this is what we were looking for. But I don't want to do this over the phone. So I'm going to come out to St. Louis and sit with you. Is that all right? And I said, sure, come on out. So Floyd came out here for like a week or 2 and we finished the album and it was an incredible experience and it was humbling at the same time. You know what I mean? Because what happens is you get comfortable with yourself. Our tools become very extensions of our workflow. Mm-hmm. And I was flying. I was doing something that I was very comfortable with. This is still when I had my HD3 rig and all those older plugins. And then Floyd rolls into town and he's mixing on a laptop with all this UAD stuff and Slate Digital, a lot newer plugins. You know what I mean? I'm still using Compressor 3 from way back when.
Nice.
I still think it's the greatest compressor of all time, but I'm sure a lot of will argue with me. We mixed the rest of the album on his laptop. And when we finished, I'm like, you know what? I'm selling everything. And that's what made me take that leap into this Apollo world and, new plugins and a new way of working. Now, don't get me wrong. The first couple of mixes I did on it, I instantly shut it off, turned my old rig back on and did the mixes. until I weaned myself off of it and learned what this new system could do.
Yeah.
And what these new plugins sounded like. And now I don't think I want to, I don't, that's not that I don't think, I don't want to go back. I want to keep it where it is right now. And I just love the way everything's been sounding and just be, rejuvenated, shall we say?
Well, it's interesting because I think about the journey through different studios for me. And I want to say that, in the 90s, it was probably the client you were working with was probably showing up with new guitars and guitar pedals and things like that. And that was a discovery for you. Like, oh, wow, that one sounds great. Yep. A new amp. And so then you learn about the amp. But it's not till the 2000s, 2010 and to now, it's like the last 10 years that it's been like that. It's like the client can show up at your studio and they'll have some hot new software or interface, and that's where you learn about this stuff from. Because as a practitioner, as somebody who's engineering and producing all the time, it's your responsibility to learn your tools really well, like you were saying before. And that means that on a certain level, you're going to learn that tool and you're going to stick to it for a while because it's kind of what you have to do. So it's funny that you describe something that has really only happened maybe in the last 10 years where your client who's just kind of dabbling in the recording software on a laptop might show up and show you what you need to use next.
It's so true. It's happened time and time again, especially on like a rough mix that someone will send me. And I look at these plugins like 2 knobs. It's a piece of shit. Why do I use a compressor. I know how to use a limiter. I know how to use an EQ. And I'll spend all this time working on a lead vocal. And I listen to the rough mix and I'm like, wow, their vocals sounded better. Yes. And I put this plugin on and I'm like, wow, that's a really good plugin. So, my initial, looking down on my nose at it going, ugh, I know how to use real plugins, to finding out that, this Renaissance Vox, I don't know if you've ever used that by Waves.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. I'll be using it on your voice for this podcast.
It's one of my, it's like people say, do you have a secret weapon? Yeah. Renaissance Vox, put on your lead vocals, your vocal subs, and just, dial it in and you're done.
Yeah.
And people are like, what? And it's compressing, it's EQing, it's limiting all at once. And it just sounds great. And that's what a lot of things we have to always remember, that it's supposed to sound good first. So we don't have to worry about the name, what it looks like, how does it sound? And that's the most important thing. That's why, we do what we do is the sound, how that has to be the number one criteria.
So it's sort of like, the takeaway is remember to be flexible and accept that we're probably going to have an opportunity to change our tools out quicker and quicker moving forward as people, as new things are introduced. Yet at the same time, part of what makes you stand out as somebody who's really good at what you do is your ability to trust your ear and compare and contrast and know when something actually does sound better. Because we're so used to listening to MP3s now. I popped a CD in the car the other day and I was like, whoa, that sounds really good, man. I must have been pretty badass at that. And then I remember, oh yeah, that's right, it's a CD. I'm so used to listening to my iPhone stream stuff over Bluetooth to my stereo right now that I kind of forgot how good it could sound.
Yeah. And, there's always going to be someone faster than you with a computer. So there's always going to be someone better at mixing. There's always going to be a better producer. There's always going to be a better beat maker, a better guitar player, a better drummer. But, what you do is what makes you special. Is it the taste that you have and, the way you mix your drums a certain way with, relationship to vocals? Embrace those type of things and, stop worrying that there's someone better around the corner and just do the best job you can. I told a student the other day, I go, show of hands, who wants to get a B in the class? And a couple of guys raised their hand. I said, man, I wish I could do a B level mix. I go, every mix I have to do has to be A level, has to be an A, has to be a home run. Because if I don't deliver at that level, my clients won't invite me back to the party. And that's what we have to do. We have to treat everything, the quality has to go into something before it comes out. And that's hands down how I approach everything that I do.
Well, is it a good party?
It's a great party.
It's a great party.
It's not a good party for loved ones and family and friends, but it's been a great ride.
Oh man. Well, all right. So I also like to ask, you kind of gave us a bit of an aha moment when you're talking about this, what your client showed up with, and accepting that the new technology that you might have thought was beneath you was not only not beneath you, but exactly where you needed to be next. Share with us another aha moment for you in the studio, something where, kind of everything clicked, became a real success moment.
I think a great aha moment would be, I don't remember the client. I remember the person who was playing drums. I remember the situation.
It was Elvis, right? Wasn't it the Elvis sessions you did?
I wish I were. They did all the remaster, all those number one hits down at the Hit Factory, but I wasn't involved in that. That would have been a great time because they brought all the old tape machines out and everything for it. It might have been a Dr. John session or something along that line because they were real drums.
Nice.
And it was in Studio 2, which was in the new Hit Factory building. We called it the 421 building because that was the address, and it's now condos. And it was there's a very iconic picture of John Lennon standing in front of this old Neve console with his arms outreached, and his son Sean is sitting at the console, and it's this beautiful console, and they had taken that one and merged it with another one, so it was two 8068 consoles. I forget how many inputs, 72 or something ridiculous. And they had, just so you know what the rooms were like, it was 4 booths. The first one was all carpeted. The second one was this huge slate room. The third one was a beautiful, beautiful wood room. And the fourth one was a combination of tile and carpet, and it had a piano in it. So I set the drums up in the wood room, and a drummer named Sean Pelton was playing. And Sean is the house drummer from Saturday Night Live band and probably one of the most recorded drummers. I mean, fantastic session drummer. And so he's just going through the drums, and I'm a big fan of not asking someone just, give me the kick, give me the snare, give me the hi-hat. So a lot of times I'll just tell the drummer, hey, do you mind just playing like a kick, snare, hat groove? And I'll literally dial in the set, based upon how the drum's setting. I'll start with the overheads and work my way back to the kick. And it's kind of ass backwards than most people work, but it really saves the drummer from hours of brutal kick, right? Sometimes you have to ask for that, but you try to get as much as you can. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, I'm in New York a year or something like that. And I'm at the Hit Factory, and I'm at this, I'm the greatest engineer in the world. Like, listen to my drums. Like, I'm like, looking around, wiping my shoulders off, like, I'm a bad mother sucker. And then all of a sudden reality sets in, that aha moment of like, don't fuck this up. You're at the Hit Factory. It's nothing to do with you. You're at this gorgeous console. You got about $1 million worth of microphones on this drummer, and you have one of the best drummers in the world. Don't screw it up. And I realized that then is that, when we're growing up and we're starting in this business, I tell everybody, go out and do 1,000 sessions of the worst people you can find. Not human beings, but musicians. The ones that, they're great guys, but maybe they can't sing in tune. Maybe their instruments are horrible, and learn how to get sounds and performances out of that. Because when you get into the situation that I was in, let's face it, all I had to do was not screw it up.
Yeah.
Because the sound is there. The drummer's there. Let's face it, most musicians, the sound is in their hands. The way he hits the skins with the sticks, that's what makes him special. A guitar player, the way they push the strings down and use their fingers on the pick or whatever, that's the sound of that instrument, right? Of that person. And my aha moment was like, okay, you've had all the training in the world. Don't mess it up.
It's so true, man. For me, my experience has always been the Bonnaroo hay bale studio, where I go down and set up a studio, and for 4 days during the festival, we could have up to 40 bands come through my studio every hour,
Really?
a different band. And it's the same mics, the same setup. It's as quick as you can go. And I would have one artist, maybe, well, I'm not going to name any. Of course, we never had anybody who was bad. Everybody was great. But there would be times where I'd have somebody who's maybe not as good as somebody else who's playing, and I'm just struggling. And I'm like, God, I must be the worst engineer in the world. I can't get this vocal and acoustic guitar to sound good. And then somebody else comes down, sits on the very same microphones, plays, and it's instantly fantastic.
Yep.
And then I think, man, I am some hot shit here. How good I am. And then, it's that eye-opening thing where you realize that it's the musicians and what they're delivering.
And that's why I say those 1,000 sessions, it definitely shapes us as engineers and producers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so, all right, well, let's keep zipping forward here.
Sure.
I want to dig into some sort of specific questions. You've done some great stuff with Nelly in St. Louis, and I wanted to ask if you had any great stories to share about working with him.
I do. So I was early on a Pro Tools advocate. At the Hit Factory, we had 2 tape machines in each room, 827. Well, when I got there were Studio 800s. And then one day we came in and there were all 827s. And we had 3324s, 3348s, which were the Sony digital multi-track machines. Mm-hmm. We had the occasional Mitsubishi 32-track that never really worked right. That 8 tapes and wanted to record whenever it wanted. But I thought I was hot shit. I was starting to get a lot of work. I had 2 or 3 racks of equipment, meaning if I like something, I never felt like the client should have to rent it, and I'd try to find something and buy it. Now, obviously, it was in my reach. I used to travel with a bunch of delays and, processing gear and preamps and stuff like that, and my own speakers.
Nice.
And all of a sudden, there's these other couple of guys at the studio getting more work than me, or just as much. And they're just carting around a computer. And I'm like, what the hell's going on with this? And one guy was using Studio Vision.
Wow.
Way back when.
Opcode.
Yeah, we're going back, and flying things around with a Tascam 33. Remember that? Not 33. What was it called? The little DAT tape or not
the
DAT tape?
DA88 or something like that. Yeah.
Yep. And then the other dude was using Pro Tools. And I just saw the writing on the wall, like the stuff that these two can do with this equipment is just fantastic. So I jumped in. Head first. I did as much Pro Tools editing and stuff like that for other people as I did engineering back then. They kept giving you more and more money to do it. And why would I say no? But anyway, so fast forward all these years later, and I'm working with Nelly, and I meet him through New York and his A&R guy, Kevin Law, and they started inviting me to more and more sessions. And they call me up and they say, we're going to go to LA and make Nelly's next record. Can you come? Sure. About 3 months. No problem. And I go, well, where are we working? And he goes, well, we don't know yet. We're going to go and spend a couple of days looking at studios. Can you come with us? Sure, I can come out early. So we'd walk into like the Village and I'd be like, oh my God, look at this room. It's incredible. Look at all the equipment. Oh, look at the mic list. And we'd do a session or two and Nelly'd be like, no, I'm not really feeling it. And then we'd go to the record plant, and then we'd go to Sunset Sound Studios, which was at the bottom of a hotel. And we must have went to about 5 or 6 or 7 different studios. And everyone was like, yeah, nah. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I want to work here so bad. And so I pulled him and his A&R guy aside, and I said, well, I kind of cheated before we came out. I kind of figured that, he really wanted to write this record as he went, and, we might run into a situation like this. So I said, I kind of went and got prices before we left. Prices? What do you mean? I said, well, I priced out a set of speakers, a microphone, a mic pre, just a basic setup. We had a console. It was like the Digidesign C Control 24. No, not Control 24. Pro Control.
Yeah.
No, Control 24, the one that had that swoop in it. And I said, well, it's about, at the time, maybe 40 grand, 30 grand worth of stuff. It was very bare bones, but it was, you still Pro Tools HT3 was expensive, and drives and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if we buy all this stuff, and the we is you, we work on the record out here, and then I go home and I'll set it up for you in your house, and you have your own studio. And they look at me and they're like, well, can we get the quality that you would get in the studio? Absolutely. Well, how do you know that? I said, well, I have a rig that I cart around the Northeast to every home studio, or not even a home studio, but like a barn, an office space that someone converted, a bedroom, garage. And I'd make these records if I wasn't on a Nelly session or a big client session, right? Out of the Hit Factory, I'd be traveling, and because a lot of when you're starting out, your clients can't afford those big, beautiful studios.
Yeah, it's fun to do too.
Oh, so much fun. And I had a rig where I had stands, I had cables, I had mics, I had the whole nine.
Yeah.
But instead of shipping my stuff, I said, this is a cool way to do it. And then you have your studio. And he had his own record label, so it was a no-brainer. So then we spent 4 or 5 days finding a mansion to live in to set up the studio. And we eventually found a beautiful place in the hills.
Yeah.
And if you look at a budget, it was so much cheaper than renting a studio for 3 months, hotel rooms for 3 months, and per diem and stuff like that. 99% of the people stayed in the house. Me and the A&R guy stayed in the hotel. There wasn't enough bedrooms for all of us. And we recorded what became Sweat and Suit. So it was a double record that came out on the same day, and it went number 1 and number 2 on Billboard. And it's the second time in history that happened. The first time was Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion, 1 and 2. And the second time was Nelly, Sweat and Suit. And it was recorded, majority of it, in a bedroom,
Wow.
And that was before you could go and buy, the traps in the back of Mix Magazine or Tape Op and stuff like that. We had packing blankets, nailed to the wall. We had, his closet is where I set up the vocal booth, and I just put his clothes in there to capture all the sound and put a little rug down, and it deadened it enough. And when he was singing, I'd have to run around this mansion telling everybody to shut up. And I remember the first time the kitchen was right below the booth or the bedroom. And I run into the kitchen. These guys are playing dominoes. And I'm like, shut up, And I look up and it's all the bodyguards. And it's like 4 guys that are between the 4 of them, about 2,000 pounds.
Oh my God.
And I go, do you guys mind keeping it down? They start laughing. And, but it was a great experience. And it was like when we first realized that, well, not me, but, I would say an artist at his level was that, man, I don't have to go, good, bad, or indifferent, but I don't have to go into a professional recording studio to make a record that will sell 1 million plus copies,
Nice, man. So he's sitting there singing in the closet, getting a good sound, surrounded by all these hanging parkas and everything. And then he beckons you over to the door and tells you it's getting hot in here. Is that where that came from?
I should have known that was coming.
All right, cool.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
No, it's quite all right.
You
It's
can
also when
with
he
me,
realized
you
that
can
I was
hear
afraid of
the
work.
wheels turning. You can actually hear me like saving my punchline to try and put it in there. But all right, man. So that's great. I love hearing that story, and I completely understand that. And of course, now it's like people are like, "What do you mean? Like everybody can record in their bedroom,
Yeah.
But I
also think that we grew up in studios, so we knew what it was supposed to sound like.
Yeah.
So chasing that sound outside of a studio in the early days, we were kind of in the wild, wild west with that. There was no one. I mean, there was always somebody doing it. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But at that level, I felt like I was a trailblazer.
Well, so now what are some of the takeaways that rock stars need to know as far as, okay, so you can get speakers, no problem. You can get a simple studio going up for a control room. You can have a laptop, you can have a mic, an interface, and record out of home. But what are the things that people need to remember as far as what makes the difference between recording at home and making a record that could be released at number 1 and 2 versus recording at home and making something that people skip over on SoundCloud?
Oh, it's the main thing are good songs. You know what I mean? There's 1 million people out there making 1 million records every day. And people say, oh, it's so impossible to be heard. No, it's not. Just have to have good songs. And if your writing is not ready to be in the studio, then keep writing. Perfect your craft. Maybe read a book about songwriting or sit down with 5 of your artists' records and do some woodshedding on, what they're doing to make it so great. And I don't care if that could be your mixing. If your mixing isn't at the level you want it to be, woodshed it. Sit down with 10 or 12 songs and pick them apart and see if you can duplicate that with what you're doing. And until you start doing that, you're just going to be spinning your wheels.
So can I go somewhere to get good songs? Do they have an app for that? Or can I just go to the section of Walmart and just go pick some up?
Sure. There is definitely people that will write you great songs. It's going to cost you. But I think what it is just perfecting your craft.
Yeah.
Working a little harder. Everybody wants to be a rock star, but who really wants to do the work? Funny thing is that when I first got to St. Louis, I sat down with a couple of engineers who worked out here, and they were like, oh, I wish I had your discography. I wish I worked with the people you worked with. You can. What do you mean? I go, well, you guys like to work during the day. sessions 11 to 7, whatever. I go, the fun is at night. Let's be honest. The guys that I want to work with want to start at 11 o'clock at night, midnight, 7 at 10 at night. That's when the fun is at. No, these guys come out of the woodwork, and you want to be able to take every session that comes at you. There is no, well, I'm going home for dinner. I'm going to go watch the Blues play or the hockey game or the baseball game. My old days, and I still do it to this day, which my girlfriend doesn't like particularly, is when the phone rings, can you do a session? Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you don't know what the session is. I can do it though.
Yeah, I know what it is. I know what you mean about that, balancing the two things, and it is tricky. And I want to be there, even despite my own sort of patting myself on the back for being proud of finding some kind of work-life balance. At the same time, I always am thinking, man, I kind of want to just work a late night session. Last time I did one, it was the most brilliant stuff we recorded was the stuff that was happening at 2 a.m.
Yeah, when the phone isn't ringing and no one's worried about it.
Yeah. Well, so now you have built some studios. You talk about going in and setting up Nelly's studio. You also, I think, built a studio, sort of a much larger scale in St. Louis. Can you tell us some important things to think about when it's time to design, build, and operate a recording studio?
Absolutely. I've had the good fortune of being involved in maybe 5 or 6 different studios, a lot of them being my own production rooms. I'm right about to go into a venture right now with a room in mid-December. But the biggest one I've ever built is the one we have here at the Extreme Institute. And I was lucky enough to be able to hire one of my favorite acousticians/designers, a guy named Francis Manzella, FM Designs out of New York City. And when they asked me, like, who could we get to help build the studio? Obviously the cockiness in me is like, I don't need anybody. I can do it. But I know that I can't do it. You know what I mean? Because there are certain things in a studio that, unless you are good at it, it's going to come out messed up. The HVAC system and the electrical system.
Yeah.
And entryways, doors, windows, how making sure that anywhere some sound can squeeze out of, because if you think about it, a studio is nothing but a boat. And instead of the boat being on water, we're keeping the water, which is sound, out or in, depending on how you're looking at it.
More
right?
of a submarine almost.
Right, exactly. So Francis was kept coming to my mind because when me and Nelly worked in Vegas, we worked at the studio at the Palms, and he did all those rooms. And it was the first time that I've mixing something, right? And I'm on the big speakers going, man, everything sounds really good. I'm glad because I bring my Pro X wherever I go. I go, wow, my speakers sound great. And I realize I'm on the big speakers. And I start to listen. I'm like, wow, these are real even. These are real, like I could actually work off of the mains, the first time that I experienced that like hi-fi-esque, large speaker. I worked at the studio in Rhode Island called Soundstation 7, and Francis had done the remodel of the control room, and it was an incredible control room. Chris Geringer in New York City, one of my friends, longtime friend and mastering engineer that I use a lot, his mastering studio at Sterling was done by Francis. And I used to love sneaking away up there and, bringing a master up there to record and not record, but, listen to him master. And I always realized like these rooms were incredible. I worked at the studio in Lake Apacon called The Barbershop, and he had done that studio too. It was like a no-brainer for me to bring him in. And what he does is he obviously knows how to record from his days at Skyline, but he knows how to design, and he just pulls the two together. Like the sight lines are great. The acoustics are just phenomenal. You know what I mean?
Well, so I think of Sterling. That's the collection of mastering studios in beautiful location on the west side of Manhattan. Yep. And with all those, you have to have all these rooms that are isolated from each other where you can crank it up and get the deepest lows and everything. And so if he did that, he must have to know a lot about isolating sound.
Well, where we put the studio in the school was a building that Nelly had, and it's in an old part of St. Louis called The Landing. We're like 2 blocks away from the Arch. But it's literally 50 feet away from one of the major thoroughfares. And on one side is a bridge that goes to Illinois. And on the other side, it's another bridge that goes to Illinois. And then the landing is kind of a lot of bars and restaurants that people hang out in. So, we had to have that isolation. And I learned a ton from him about HVAC systems, electrical systems, and just the construction, how to incorporate the multiple layers of drywall and sheetrock and what to look for. We had 6 months to make a studio that would take 18 months to record. A lot of times Fran would call up and be like, hey, can I change when you get to, plan page 15, number 72, this little way these two things come together. I want to change that. Sorry, I can't do that. He's like, it's not going to cost you anything. I just want to change it. I go, Fran, it's not about costing us anything. That wall's been closed for, 3 days now. Impossible. How did you guys do it? And we literally had 2 crews working. I'd show up at 6 in the morning and get the morning crew get off on the ground, talk to the super, and this is what we're going to go for today. And then I'd go to the office and start writing curriculum, designing the equipment that's going to be in there, what we're going to do, stuff like that, deal with all the running of a company, right? Mm-hmm. Putting a school together from the ground up. And then at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, I'd come over here with my boots and my hammer, and I'd suit up and I'd work with the night crew till about, 12, 1, 2 in the morning. And we were going so fast that, everybody was like, and I told everybody from day one, like, this is how we're going to make it. It's going to be perfect. And if you guys screw up, I'm going to come over here and destroy what you've screwed up, and you're going to have to rebuild it.
Nice.
And they didn't believe me. And the first day, some dude took his saw that cuts, drywall, and they've got to put in a wire for the sprinkler or the smoke detector, right? Or the fire alarm. And he just cut a hole and swiped it over there and put some compound over it. And I'm like, look at this motherfucker. So that crew went home, and I circled it with my big Sharpie, and I took my hammer and smashed it to bits. And I waited in the morning. I came back in the morning, and everybody's screaming and yelling by the time I got there. And I told them, I said, guys, you don't understand. Once this mistake gets covered up, we're never going to know it until the outside sound is coming through there. And then it's too late to fix it.
Yeah.
So they realized that I wasn't kidding around. But, to take that on a home level, unless you're doing all those things, the floating floors, the multiple levels of sheetrock and plywood and all these things and all the double walls, and unless you're doing all of that stuff, there's no need to go crazy when you're at home. When you're at home, you're looking for, look, we're never going to make a completely isolated studio. It's just too expensive. Who can afford that?
Right.
And if you can afford it, you can't justify the bill that you're going to have to charge your client for it. So what we do is do the things that are necessary to make yourself work. You know what I mean? If you need a nice room, well, let's look at our first reflections. How are your sidewalls doing? How is your ceiling doing? Do we need to build, a nice little cloud and some nice traps on the side? Let's start there. Get the sound the way we want it. Listen to some records once you do that stuff.
Yeah, now you're talking about the monitors, the control room, and your listening area, right?
Yep. And then when it comes to the live room, what are we looking for? Are we just doing vocals? Well, then we can build a smaller booth, or we can make some gobos. There was a great thing. I tell everybody this. Was it Pro Tools Expert? The thing you see on Facebook all the time. Mm-hmm. Some dude made these unbelievable traps out of some IKEA bookcases.
Nice.
And for like 65, 70, 80 bucks, $100, like, and you couldn't tell that they were some bookcase,
And they were bass traps?
Mid frequency. So, they're more like gobos so you could build like 4 of them and put them around your microphone, and it would cut out all the reflections and stuff like that. I think a lot of people get caught up on these little shells that go around a microphone now. Right. Thinking that that's the beginning and end all. But man, I who wants to sing looking at that like you're singing into a corner that you're a dunce,
Wasn't that how Blair Witch Project ended, I think?
But think about it. At the end of the day, the studio's a magical experience, right? I'm going back to my hippiness.
Yeah.
I want to inspire the guys that are singing. I want to inspire the musicians. Singing into a a round reflector is not inspiring to me. Being in a bigger room, but maybe I can control those acoustics around that singer so they have this sense of like, this is my space, I'm my little workshop. And that's what I try to do now with my setups.
Well, that's cool, man. Well, hey, we're about to take a break and we'll hit the jam session here. But before we do, let me ask you this question, because you've been teaching at the Extreme Institute. I know you're teaching production, mixing, all that. What's one of the most common frustrations that people have when it comes to hip hop production, mixing, and mastering?
That they can't get their low end right.
So what do we do to get our low end right? How do we get our bass and our kick to go together, especially in hip hop where it's like all about low end?
Well, what's funny is, I came from rock and roll and I loved hip hop. I get to New York, I did a lot of hip hop, and I keep going back to rock and roll and pop and stuff like that. But leaving rock to do a lot of hip hop taught me about low end. And so now when we'll go back to those other genres, I can fill that in. And a lot of guys are bass shy, I should say. Mm-hmm. And I think the most important thing to think about is how to marry those instruments that are all doing the same thing. You have an 808, you have a low kick, you have a bass that is sometimes subharmonic frequencies, and they're all fighting for this, frequency from 30, 60, 30, 50 hertz to, 220, maybe a little higher. And you can't just add it to everything and hopefully the best will push, You have to start to maybe take a little out of the bass and add it to the kick. So those start to marry. They start to get, I guess, put together easier. Mm-hmm. And then a friend of mine, Mark Donahue, a mastering engineer out of New York City, Boston, does a lot of classical recording too. He makes fun of me because I use more than 2 microphones to record anything.
Well, hey, no, if he's got a Decatree, so is he.
I know, right? They don't like to talk about that. They just like to say they use 2. He started to talk about aligning my low frequencies, meaning, a sound wave flipped out of phase is going to cancel out, right? But 2 sound waves or 2 low end frequencies that are just off a little and maybe not pushing that speaker at the same time create that little bit of, not dissonance, but the speaker's not working efficiently.
Right.
And
it's like a cone filtering.
Right. So I started to, find out, what's my main low end instrument? Okay, it's the 808. So let me kind of adjust things around that. Now, I'm not talking huge timing things. I'm just saying, sample level. And all of a sudden, I noticed my whole low end just comes into focus because now my speakers are more efficient and they're pushing when they're supposed to push instead of pushing and pulling at the same time. And then I can start to take frequencies out of a kick to add to a bass, or take frequencies out of a bass to add to a kick. So those those instruments start to blend better. And then all of a sudden you have a nice tight low end.
Interesting. So it's like you start with your main low end instrument, like the 808, and then you begin to, that's your benchmark. Mm-hmm. It's your reference point. And then you begin to add those other things to it and see how it's affecting that 808 sound, if it's killing it or if it's helping it.
Sure.
And so
it might not be there. Maybe it's a kick drum. It could be. It's always different, mm-hmm. but there has to be something. It's whatever the principle is in the mix.
Yeah. And then when you talk about sample level, you're talking about delaying things by samples, moving them around. So it's a little bit later, it's a little bit earlier, but literally on the sample level, not even whole milliseconds.
Not even milliseconds, samples.
Wow.
Because we start to get into milliseconds, then we're changing the feel of the song, right?
Yeah.
But at the sample level, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 samples, maybe a little more than that, but, nothing too drastic. And the principle, if the kick is the real powerful part of the low end, then everything else can move to that. Sometimes, the way a bass is sequenced or played, it's going to be a kind of bit off in push and pulling, but that push and pull is enough to make my low end kind of vibrate instead of push at the same time.
That's great, man. Well, that's cool. I'm glad I asked you about that, and that's a great tip. So thank you for that.
No problem.
Well, we'll take a break now and come back for the jam session. Rockstars, before we go, I want to remind you that you can get show notes to everything we're talking about if you go to rsrockstars.com and just search for Carl Nappa, and it'll take you right to this blog post. If you're listening to the podcast on your iPhone or your other podcast listening device, you should be able to just click through with your finger on the show notes, and there should be a link you can just press with your finger Don't have to do any fancy typing or any fancy anything, but it'll take you right to the stuff we're talking about. So we'll see you guys in just a moment for the jam session. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks. And you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, Rockstars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Rockstars, welcome back for the jam session. My guest today is Carl Nappa, joining us from St. Louis. And Carl, are you ready to jam?
I am.
All right, dude. When you got started out in recording, what was one of the things that was holding you back?
Time. The time that I could allocate to those early days, because I still had to work and make a living and do stuff like that. I was going to school at the same time as well, and time is what held me back. And I eventually quit everything just to do what I love doing.
Right. So you needed to get in your 10,000 hours to mastery, but you just couldn't really go in with both feet at first.
Yeah, there was too many other things pulling me in other directions. I just had to give up on all that stuff.
And so eventually you just quit everything else, and that was how you got the time?
Everything. Quit college, quit working for my family's business. They were electricians. I remember the day that I threw my boots and then my tools in the truck and my boots in the garbage and told them all, I love you guys, but see ya.
Put my boots in the garbage. I love it. And so, all right. So now we've got, some listeners that are maybe at a stage in their life where they're ready to jump in with both feet. They might be, late teens ready to jump in with both feet to learn this stuff. We also have listeners who are in, closer to 50 and above who are ready to jump in with both feet because they've just been doing something else for a while and they're ready to do it now. What about for people who love doing this, but they're not going to, work all night long? What advice do you have for them about sort of getting their skills together and being able to get good at their craft?
Practice. The best thing you can do is practice. If you mix a song for a client, mix it 10 times. You know what I mean? Or if you're charging by the hour, and you have a decent mix at the end of the money when the money runs out, put an extra double the time on your own to get better. Try some different stuff. That's the only way to get better. It's, I can go out. I love to buy guitars. And I am not the world's best guitar player. I'm probably far from the worst.
Well, that's cool. Obviously, because I am. So,
but they look great on the wall. You know what I mean? But unless you're practicing every day, you're never going to get better at them. And I believe recording and producing is the same way. Producing or producing?
Producing.
Yeah, producing. No, but you have to practice, and a lot of times if I'm on a session or not on a session for a while, I'll jump in my room and practice for a minute. Oh man, my editing chop's a little off. I'll run through some exercises and, maybe not have my assistant clean up my next mix project, and I'll go through it and get all the fades right and all that stuff just to have that skill set back up because I know I'm coming in on some recording sessions. And the guy who's starting out, just practice. Get your friends to record. You can't find you have any friends that record, go to a local show and talk to people. Hey, I have a studio. Don't give anything away for free, because when free is involved, people don't take it serious.
Yeah.
But $10 an hour, $5 an hour, something, so at least there's a value there. There's an exchange of something. You're giving them some intellectual property that's been recorded, and they're giving you some experience.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of a spoof I did when I was in school for recording, and I came back up, and I was actually in St. Louis. I was mixing a record with my band from there, and we're sitting at this little mixer, and they're all sitting around me, and I'm the guy who, supposedly knows what's going on, and I've lean mattresses up on the wall to treat the room for my mixing. And so I'm sitting there, and I put my fingers on all the faders on the console, and I told them, I was like, yeah, man, we're doing some cool stuff at school. We actually have to do these exercises. So we've been doing finger fader mixing exercises, and I started extending faders one finger at a time, like I was doing some sort of yoga exercise. I had them going for a minute. They were like, whoa, no way.
Wow, that's a good one, yeah.
That's awesome. Or maybe I thought they did, and they were like, Lidge, you are so full of shit. And now, how about sharing with us some of the best advice you received?
To listen to the song. I had a producer at an early age always tell me to listen. To don't get in the way of what's supposed to be happening. And at first I thought it was hocus pocus. You know what I mean? Like, this guy's a hippie. And then when I got into New York, and I was lucky enough to sit behind the Phil Ramones and the Reef Mardens and even the Mutt Langs, and watch them produce a song. And, on playback, they were eagerly listening to what was coming out of the speakers to know what to do next.
Yeah.
And we have to listen.
Well, did they look different when they listened? Were they just listening? Was there anything where
Reef Martin was the coolest person I've ever met in my life. Hands down. He showed up every day in a 3-piece suit, sat in front of the Neve, always to the right, on the right-hand side of the producer's section, or the center section, I should say. And we'd always have delivered, 4 or 5 newspapers, and they'd just sit in front on the desk, and he'd cross his legs and read his newspapers and look up occasionally going, oh, that was out of tune. Try the A flat instead of the A, or, do this and do that. And it seemed to be not paying attention, but he was paying attention more eagerly because he was taking one of his senses out of the equation. It's like when I talked about, listening to your mix, stop looking at the screen and just listen as a listener, to take yourself out of the mix and become a listener. Yeah. And it was amazing watching him do that.
Yeah. I remember meeting an engineer who told me the same thing. He said he liked to have the TV on while he's mixing.
Oh, it's amazing.
Well, so now how about sharing a favorite, or not necessarily a favorite, but just a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something that our rock stars could use this very day on a session in their studio? Sure.
And it's a tip that I stole from my friend Tony. I alluded to him earlier, Tony Black. We kind of grew up at the Hit Factory together. It's to have a template. And I'll open up a new session. Let's just say I'm doing some vocals to a 2-track. So I import my 2-track into a session, check my disc allocation, and then import my template. My template consists of a work track that my lead vocal is going to be recorded on, or any vocal, about 10 lead vocal tracks, already subgrouped to a lead master, and then about 36 or 42, I forget the exact number, of background vocal tracks, all grouped out into 4s, panned out, kind of leveled out, and effects on them and everything. So as a singer is singing, let's say they want to do a big background stack of 30 tracks of vocals. I go to my work track, I name it the singer's name, we start recording. As soon as they sing the first part, I hold down control, grab the waveform, the clip, drag it down. And instantly, I'm always recording. That track is always on input and always in record. Even when I'm playing back, if the singer sings something interesting, I drop into record. I'm on
punch mode, you mean?
Yeah, right. So I'm always recording. If I see something I like, I hit record. I just back it up, pull out with my cutter tool And then they say, oh, I wish I knew which harmony I sang. Oh, you mean like this? Oh, you have it? Yeah, of course I have it. So it's a very productive way, a very quick way. And the artist is never waiting for you. They're never waiting, say, oh, give me another track. Okay, hold on a second. Shift Apple and new track, audio track, input 7, output 2. Oh, was it output 2? Output, you know what I mean? That's right. So much wasted time. Literally, if you can take a breath, I'm ready to record again. And I believe that takes all of the waiting and the slowing down of a session out. And then, because I produce and record a lot at the same time, I don't have to think about the technical side as much as just watching my compressor, make sure I'm not bumping it too much, and then listening to make sure that, am I overloading my preamp? How does my levels look? So I'm looking at the basic side of engineering and concentrating more on the creative side of, getting through these vocals. I don't want to say quickly, but efficiently.
No, at the speed at which the singer's trying to sing the damn things.
Yep. And I don't go back too far. A couple of bars. I learned at an early age. If I go back, half of the verse to sing, oh man, the guy's going to be sleeping by the time I get there.
Yeah. So rock stars, if you're a musician, put yourself on the other side of the glass, know what it's like to sing over something, know what it's like to play guitar, and trust what you think about it so that when you go back to the engineering seat, you are remembering that these things are important for the other person that you're recording. And if you aren't a musician, what advice do you have for somebody who's not a musician? They can't really experience that. Just sort of take notes or maybe ask some musicians what they really like. What's the best session for them?
Let me see if I get this question right. What advice would be for a non-musician who's recording and producing?
Yeah, exactly. So if they're not a musician and they don't know what it's like to sing on the mic, how do they learn what the singer really needs? Just take notes from you, I guess, right?
Just to be efficient. Don't go back too far. A rule of thumb is a couple of bars.
Don't talk on the talk back a lot.
Well, funny enough, I push it a lot. I know that singers are in that room all alone, and I look in that window when we're all laughing. Now, I might have just told the most funniest joke in the world, which I believe I did. They don't see it that way. They just think that we're laughing at them singing. Yeah. So a lot of times I have that talk back down, and so that they're part of the conversation. Now, if that person doesn't want anybody in the room, lights are dim, everybody's out. And, they're getting my full attention. I'm not on my phone. I'm not Skyping. I'm not Instagramming, texting. My attention is on the person singing 20 feet from me. And I believe that they're the most important person in my life at that particular time.
Yeah, it's good advice. In fact, I would say rock stars, it's likely that you, like me, are getting a little bit sick of your phone these days and use the studio session as an opportunity to finally just turn it off and have focus time and not be distracted by it.
Yep.
So, all right, how about this one? A favorite hardware tool, something physical that you really like to have around on a session, always seems to make your sessions better.
A favorite hardware tool, obviously, is my speakers. Can't live without them. Yeah. I've tried to replace them for the past 10 years. Pro X Studio 100s. It's a great speaker, but it's also something that I've used for 15 years that maybe plus that, I know what they're doing just by looking at them. I could shut the amp off. Well, I guess you'd still hear it. But if I'm seeing a lot of driver movement, I know the low end is off. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I just bought some new speakers, some Duntecs, and they're these 200-pound, 6'2" monsters, and they're incredible. So, it's always time. I'm always, maybe I've been called a collector or a hoarder or, whatever, but I'm a big firm believer in putting back into your craft. So I'm not afraid to buy something. I'm not afraid to put a little bit of money back into my company, which is myself. So, I probably invested a little bit more money than I wanted to. It was probably my mortgage payment this month. And, but it's just a whole new listening experience. It's a beautiful, real hi-fi experience. So yeah, on the hardware side, it's definitely the listening environment, because without that environment, I'm just second guessing myself.
Yeah. So I guess the takeaway, rock stars, is when you do find a favorite pair of speakers, stick to them.
And they don't have to be these stupidly priced speakers too. A friend of mine calls it the cork sniffers, the guys that are out there on in the magazine saying, "Oh, this is the latest, greatest," and "Oh, look at this and look at that." Man, I walked into a studio the other day and the dude had a pair of KRKs, like entry level, mid level models. They weren't expensive, and they sounded awesome. Now, his room was decently treated, but it's like I tell people, like, buy what you can afford and grow into them, and then grow out of them at the same time. Like, you're gonna find a pair of speakers, and if you use them enough and listen to them enough, you'll know the pros and cons of each speaker. Like so I bought those huge ones the other day, and at the same time, I found a pair of old Optimus 7s, the old Radio Shack speakers.
Oh, yeah.
And they sound awesome, but they were $15. And, you know, you just never know. It shouldn't be a price range. It should be, you should listen to everything.
Yeah, it's about what works and what's useful. Yep. Well, so now how about sharing a software tool that people should know about? Maybe it's a favorite one. Maybe it's just something recently you've been really digging.
So recently I switched over, to this whole virtual Pro Tools, more away from my HD3 rig. I'm native.
Right.
Sorry, but with the Apollo. So I've been really messing around with their plugins, and they're like a drug dealer. God bless them. They give you a taste and then you keep coming back for more. And then they put this thing in your email. Hey, save $50, get these two and get that too. And I'm a sucker for that every time. I shouldn't say they're like a drug dealer. That's horrible. But I really enjoy their plugins right now. I just bought Slate, the drum replacer, whatever it's called.
The Trigger.
Oh,
it's fantastic, isn't it?
It's unbelievable. I've been a slave to the Pro Tools sound replacer for years.
Yep.
And you have to go through with the missed triggers, and it takes a long time. Now, if you do it right, it comes out incredible. But it's time consuming. Mm-hmm. And I have friends that use Drumagog and some other things. And my buddy Floyd is the one who hit me to this one. And it was just like, wait, I can load 6 different samples and I can just blend them in here. And it's been a real lifesaver.
It's the first time I've ever done drum triggering where I felt like it automatically worked correctly.
Right? You think that you're doing something wrong or you need to be doing more, but it just works perfectly. And without a lot of additional adjustments, tweaking.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Well, I dig that. In the past, I remember just going through at a sample level and just adjusting everything by hand.
Sure.
One sample at a time.
Yep. And the problem with that is there's no dynamic. Well, you got to write the dynamics in and do it. It's just so much work.
And it just took an incredible amount of time. That's when I had the TV on in the studio. All right. So now how about for a resource for the business side of doing this? People who might want to do this for a living. You got any tips for them?
Oh, QuickBooks.
Great.
Every day, all day long. Best $200 I ever spent, $100 and something. It was the first time that I could have all my invoices in the same place, knowing where the money was coming in and going out, and really treating it like a business. Remember, at the end of the day, this isn't a hobby. You want to make a little bit of money on it to be able to pay your mortgage, your rent, buy some food for your family, your groceries, whatever, right? You got to keep track of stuff, and that's the best, most efficient way to do it. Unless you had a full-time accountant that I don't want to pay for that. I don't know about you.
Any tips as far as invoicing people, any tricks you've learned, not tricks, but just like smart practices for how to send invoices? Did you discover that invoicing something up front and following up later is a great way? Did you find very effective ways to, gently and nicely remind people that the invoice was still unpaid, things like that?
Yeah. Yes and no. Nobody likes to talk about money. We're in a creative business where, we all are afraid that, once we start talking about money, it gets in the way, and then it's always in the back of their mind, like, oh, he's just money hungry. But the truth is, we got to take care of business. I can't pay my car note by telling those guys, hey, I'm going to pay you what I owe you right now in 60 days. It just doesn't fly. So what I do is I put it all out on the table in the beginning. Okay, this is what you're getting. For the amount of price you're paying me, you're going to get X, Y, and Z. And all I want in return is, if I'm working with a local artist, maybe it's half up front or a percentage up front, and then the payment schedule, first payment, and then before delivery of the masters. Unfortunately, if I'm working with a record company, I need to get a PO. Mm-hmm. I need to make sure I have that before the session or else I'll never get paid. And there's things that you have to do to go through that. You have to make sure your what are they, I-9s or not I-9s? What do you call it?
W9, yeah.
That's in there, that you're in the system. And there are things that you have to follow, and you have to be friendly with those people, because once you yell at them once, guess what? You're going to the back of the line every time your invoice comes up. And, and it's just working that side of the business. So maybe when you wake up in the morning, while you're getting your coffee, in the first 20 minutes of your day is shooting off those emails. Hey, what's up, Joe? I haven't seen that check yet. Or, hey, make sure that you look for the mix in Dropbox. I want to make sure we can get this to the next level. Or, and just doing the busy work, because it has to be a business.
I think that the business side and invoicing and learning how to do that stuff, just like mixing, give yourself the grace and the space to practice it, and just, it's okay if you screw it up at first. Maybe don't screw it up with, all your income. Screw it up with little bits so you can learn these things and dial it in as you go. I
mean, we're bound to screw stuff up. It's just the way it is. But the less hit you take financially on your side, the better.
Yeah. Now, how about a resource for the organizational side of stuff? Have you found anything online that has been really helpful for staying organized?
I know at Nelly's studio, we bought some software that was supposed to organize your studio and your flow, but it never really caught on. And all we really did was stay with QuickBooks for invoicing, and everything was put into there. The bills, the money coming in, the money going out, and it was very much kept after like that. As far as organizing my professional life, I keep a schedule. Mm-hmm. I keep a calendar, almost to the point of a fault that if it's not on the calendar, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
And I have multiple calendars. I have a calendar from obviously my school life, and then also for my studios, multiple, the ones that are here and then the one at my house.
When you do something in the calendar, have you found any effective ways to make sure that the other person you've agreed to do something with also has it in their calendar?
I've tried, and I have not found any.
Just communicate a lot?
Yeah, I do. I'm this next studio, I think I'm just going to do a straight Google Calendar, invite everybody to it. But then the flip side of that is, do I really want people knowing my business? At the same time, there has to be that mysterious part of your thing that everybody thinks you're busy all the time, so that, you keep up that facade. But then the flip side of that is, who really cares? You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. So hopefully you are busy all the time.
I am, and that's the problem. So I need all these calendars, but I just haven't found a great one. If you have an idea, I'd love to hear it.
Well, there's actually one that I use for the podcast, which you used yourself. It's called Calendly.
That was actually really amazing. I get the reminders and all that stuff. Yeah.
That's a pretty cool way to do it. I haven't put it for the studio yet, but I definitely would like to. And it will let somebody schedule an appointment, and then afterwards it'll send reminder emails leading up to it, so you can make sure they have all the right info.
Yeah, the reminder emails were fantastic, by the way.
All right, well, thank you. Well, so there is one bit of organization. I noticed on your credits there was something about organizing and maintaining all of the hard drives for Nelly and for the studio. What tips do you have for rock stars about keeping your digital files organized, backed up, duplicated, all that kind of stuff?
I have quite a bit to say about that. If you don't have multiple versions of it, it doesn't exist. Plain and simple. If you have one hard drive at your studio, you might as well just take it and throw it against the wall right now, because it doesn't exist. You need a backup, and you have to be religious about a backup. And there's some great softwares out there where you literally, turn on your computer and it's backing up to your backup drive. It tells you what files aren't there, and it does it. I've gotten away from using those as much because I've been a little bit more my own studio. So I'm just constantly throwing stuff to my backup drive. Mm-hmm. But organizational skills, very simple. I treat every session exactly the same. Now, I'm not talking about the way I record or mix or whatever. My hierarchy. There's a session folder of the band's name. Inside that folder are all the different songs. Inside each song is four things. You have your audio files. You have your Pro Tools session. We don't have fade files anymore. We have the next other file, whatever it is.
Just like movie folders, right? Or some video.
Yeah. But then I have these two other folders that I create. I create an old session folder, mm-hmm. and an old mix folder, or I call it an old bounce, or whatever I call it, but it's old mix and old session, but it's labeled with that name of that song. Now within that are any old versions of that song. So if I'm working, say I'm doing the song called The View, right? So it'll be View 1.0. Now I start tomorrow, save session as The View 1.1. It's a new day. 1.0 goes inside the old session folder. This way I can always get back quickly and easily and efficiently to where I was.
Yeah.
Now, if I don't open up that band's song for 6 months, when I open it up, I know exactly where I left off at. I left off at View 1.1, and typically there'll be a bounce in there of that night's work. So if someone says, hey, can you send me the rough mix from the other night? Sure. I don't have to go searching. I don't have to check by name and by date and by any of that stuff. So every session is set up the exact same way for a very quick, efficient way to interrogate each one and to know where it is. Because I learned that when we're doing some of these Nelly records where we would do 50 or 60 songs that would be the basis of an album that would whittle down. And if I didn't know instantly, hey, go to this song, and I'd go there, oh, which version? Are you waiting for me again? And I don't ever want to be waited on, waited by. You know what I'm talking about.
Right. Waited on. Yeah. So another thing that I've discovered that was important is when you do a mix or a rough of a session, take that session that just printed that mix and put it in a folder. And the reason for that is because if you come back later and you realize that that rough sounded amazing and there was something really special about it, you want to be able to open that session exactly where it was left off. You might have somebody who says, oh, that was perfect if we could just adjust the vocal a little bit or the bass or something like that.
Yep. And so what I do is I try to label the rough, the name of the session.
Yeah.
So if it's the View 1.0, the View 1.0, today would be 11/1/16.
Yeah. And then here's another little trick that I learned from a friend of mine who's actually a writer. So he works for a newspaper. When you add a date to something, don't even put in a slash or a dash. Just put what's today? It's 11/1/16. So it would be 1/1/01/16, and just that batch of numbers equals the date. And then the computers won't get confused later and think it's a file tree or some other management that can't handle the dash or the slash.
That's a really good idea. It's almost like the old marking of an old Fender Telecaster or Stratocaster. It was how they dated it and stuff like that.
Yeah. So now, rock stars, when we recorded this, even though you're hearing it later. Cool. We've pulled back the veil, and now you know all our secrets. All right. So now we've got a couple more questions, and then we're all done. But this one is hypothetical. Actually, both the next ones are hypothetical. This is one that says, if you had to start all over again, which you're kind of doing with the new studio, but if you needed a simple setup to record, you were in a strange place where you didn't know anybody yet, and you needed to find people to make music and make records with, and you needed to make ends meet while you did it so you could survive and eat. What sort of advice would you give somebody who's in that situation now?
I guess I would start backwards. I'd go meet the people first. I'd go out to clubs. I'd go out to events. I'd go to where the music's being made. Meet bands, talk to them, introduce myself, try to get, infiltrate a scene and let people know that I'm in town and I'd love to work with you guys. Now, people don't want to just jump on your bandwagon right away and give you a shot. So maybe, get friendly with some of the other studio owners in town. So if I didn't have the money to buy a simple setup, well, how much is it to me to rent your room? Oh, $20 an hour? All right. It's the cost of doing business. Maybe I'll take less money in the front end to build a relationship with this guy that, I can get introduced to more clients. Like, I don't want to just slingshot off of him to get people, but it's a good way to get into the network of bands, of managers, of people a little bit quicker. And for a simple setup, a nice cheap mic. I mean, let's face it, I can go to Guitar Center every day of the week and buy a beautiful Audio Technica, 40/30, 40/40 is a little more expensive. A decent preamp, an M-Box, and I'm off and running, and not for a lot of money. And nowadays, there's so many different, mics in that price point of $200 that, the sky's the limit. I mean, right now I'm talking into a $300 microphone.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, the preamp's probably a little more expensive.
Tell us about your mic, man. What mic are you using?
I'm using a beautiful SM7B.
And tell us once again, you told me a little bit before this interview about how you discovered that mic and realized that it was a cool mic to use.
Yeah. So, it's been, a microphone you see always in an announcer's booth. And the polar pattern, I want to say, is hypercardioid. So it's really picking up what the singer or the talking person, like right now, person talking, the interviewee.
That's you. You're the talking person.
Is saying. And it's not as much of the room tone and room noise. So a friend of mine was in the studio and set one up and was just blown away by that. How everybody was kind of talking and the music was a little louder and the rear rejection and it was just incredible. So that kind of opened up the door to this microphone. And then I started seeing it everywhere. Michael Jackson used it on Thriller, the story goes. And then, a lot of rock and roll singers will use it in the studio because of the character of its mic, of the sound. It's very similar to a stage microphone, like an SM7.
It's almost a self-compressing mic. It already sounds sort of compressed and smoothed out in a nice way. Yep. Well, so now, but I remember when you said your friend came and you were doing a session, it was a hip-hop session, wasn't it? And there was something, weren't you recording in the control room?
He was actually recording in the control room, and he had the artist didn't want to wear headphones. He wanted to listen to the speakers, and this is what he grabbed and put it up in the speakers weren't even out of phase. They were just kind of like in the null part of the mic, and it was pretty loud, and it worked out great.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. So that, I think, is the real key takeaway, is that you need that rejection because the speakers might be cranking in the room, if you want to sing like that. And there's, what kind of sessions have you done where having a mic and a vocal take, an album take, go down in the control room with speakers has been the way to go?
It wasn't a final take, but it was a reference take. I did one about a week ago, and I had this band, and I wanted the separation on the guitars. So instead of putting the singer in the vocal booth, I put the guitars in there facing away from each other so I could get, the separation on the two amps. And I had him in the control room, and I had it loud. I mean, like stupidly loud, like they were playing a concert. And so I had the bass player going direct, and also his amp going through the wall, and the two guitar players and the other amps in the wall. But everybody was in the control room with me. And the singer was singing on an SM7B. And when I say that it was cranked, like it was rock and roll volume, and no feedback. And you play back and you hear some of the music, but it's not like if you had a 47 tube microphone in the control room where what I mean? It's going to be useless.
And the other remarkable thing about having music bleed onto another mic as you record in the control room or even overdub is, hey, guess what? It's the same song.
Yeah.
Sometimes that actually can be a good thing. Well, cool. So, all right, now here's the very last question. We're going to take the studio Wayback Machine here. You already talked about future Carl. We're going to go meet past Carl. So, if today's Carl could go back and meet early Carl, I guess you're just about to. You're in your third year at UMass Lowell. You haven't quite quit yet, but you've got an idea and you think you want to be a rock star of the recording studio. Go back and give yourself one piece of advice for the single most important thing that young Carl should know to become a recording studio rock star himself.
So that's an interesting question. What if you could tell yourself, or what could you tell yourself if you could go back in time? Obviously maybe not cut your hair that way, but
eat better,
right? Don't smoke. But what I would tell myself professionally is stop thinking you're not good enough. It's a crazy thing to say, right? But in my early part of my career, I always felt like I didn't belong. Like I thought someone was going to walk in, especially in the early days in New York City, and walk in and go, "What are you doing at the console? Get out. You don't belong here. You're not good enough." And, I think in the early part of any career, I don't care if it's recording or if you're a surgeon or whatever, a lawyer, we always second guess our ability in the beginning because we don't have the experience to show us that we belong and that we can do the job. So I guess the advice I would give myself is like, don't beat yourself up. You do belong. Just work hard and just follow your instinct.
You got this.
You got this. Exactly.
Nice, man. Well, you mentioned being a surgeon. In that case, you might want to really keep double checking a lot along the way. Don't get too overconfident too quickly. But I love hearing that. And I remember feeling a lot of the same way. And I think that's probably along the lines of the advice I would give myself is just go back and just remind me to believe in myself. Like whatever I bring to the table is probably the best thing I'm ever going to be able to bring to the table.
Right.
So I appreciate that, man. Carl, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. You completely rock. I know you haven't thought about, the right terminology for how to rock in hip hop, but I'm sure it'll come to you later. It was great to hang out with you, man. Thank you so much for
pleasure.
Sharing all your stories and your time and sorting out how to make Skype work and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we learned something tonight, didn't we?
All right, let our rock stars know how they can learn more about you, follow you, and get in touch with you if they need to or whatever.
Sure thing. I just relaunched my website, so it's kind of on its beginning stages. So it's a work in progress, should I say. But it's very simple, carlnappa.com, CarlNappa.com. I am on Instagram. I always put up stupid pictures. I wish I knew my Instagram name. I think it's just Carl Nappa.
It might be.
I think it is. I think I changed it. I had something sillier before. And then, just email is just carl.nappa. Not .com, at Gmail. I switched it.
Okay, cool.
And, anybody else has questions, just, shoot an email.
Nice, man.
Not the end of the world here. So,
Carl, I'm going to invite you right now live on the show, and you too, rock stars listening, to come join our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Recording Studio Rockstars. And we've got a private group there where we can all collaborate, chit chat, ask questions, answer questions. And Carl, if you please come join us, it'd be awesome to have you in there. And anybody just tag Carl and give him a shout out and say hello right there.
Thanks so much.
All right, dude. Well, we'll see you around the studio. And in the meantime, go enjoy some St. Louis, I guess. What's cool right now in St. Louis?
My new studio that opens up December 15th.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. That's going to be right about the time this podcast comes out.
That's perfect.
All right, dude. Cheers, man. We'll see you around.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.